Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, I have a very personal conversation with Kim from Calling In Christians about her abortion experience. This is definitely a heavy episode, so there are resources below if you need some support or you're looking to learn more about the things that were discussed in today's episode. We talk about personal experiences, the Texas law, the heartbeat law that came out, gestational age, the conservative argument against abortion, and just a range of other things. This was a very difficult episode for me to edit and to put out, but with everything going on in the world and America right now, I thought that there was no better time than now for this story. So tune in. Okay, cool. How do you feel today?
I feel good. I'm a little nervous. I've never
talk to me.
I'm a very open person, and I've definitely given away snippets of my story here and there on my own platforms and stuff, but I've never, been on a podcast. So thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really important, and
yeah.
I'm not that nervous though. I'm an open book, so
for sure.
I'd love to know a little bit about you. Are you religious or spiritual? Just so I know my language to kind of.
I'm conservative background. I don't know. Have you listened to any of the podcast episodes?
Yeah, I listened to a couple, and it sounded like you might have come from an evangelical space, right?
Yeah. It was non-denominational. And yeah, so I was Christian, and I guess I was in a very religious relationship that I think propelled a lot of my negative views towards Christianity, because they were very fundamentalist, and so I had a hard time with that, and then left, and now I'm not religious at all, and very happily not religious. But my language background is I went to school in Christianity since I was a speaking child, and so you could quote Bible verses at me and we can have that level of dialogue, and I'm super into having that level of dialogue. I just don't believe it personally.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Don't worry, I'm not gonna whip out any Bible verses at you.
I did. I wrote some down from my notes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm here for this talk. This is what we're doing. Yeah, so I'm down to have all of that discourse, because I think being who I am, my family's still very religious. So half of my world of who I know socially is religious, and half is very extreme liberal because I'm extreme liberal. So I kind of hold both spaces, and I try to talk to both people, I hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm kind of in the camp of progressive Christianity, so I get a little bit of mix of both worlds.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't truly know too much about progressive Christianity. What is the progressive viewpoint on abortion?
Well, it differs. Progressive Christianity is super diverse, but ultimately, they are a form of Christianity that ultimately, advocate for social justice in all aspects. And so part of that, many people see abortion to be obviously a part of that. I'm kind of undertake a reproductive justice framework. I think it's really holistic and beautiful. And yeah, so I can't speak to all of progressive Christianity.
Of course. But I think you can speak to it more than I know. And if I don't know anything about it, I promise you that so many listeners have never maybe even heard that term,
Yeah. So people think it's new. Progressive Christianity really is just about taking biblical scripture. I don't actually work with scripture as much as other people. I'm not trying to lead a parish or anything, but they use tactics like feminist hermeneutics and other things to really look at the context of the Bible and to liberate it in some aspects and to apply it to our modern day world in a way where they believe that the divine is present with people, and there's so much judgment and boundaries and just injustice and oppression going on in the world right now at the hands of conservative Christians, especially in the United States. And progressive Christianity is really a resistance towards that. They kind of reject that notion of Jesus, of faith, and they say that's not what we stand for. That's not how we view Christianity. And we're here to promote justice in all forms.
Which is beautiful. So why do conservative Christians not support justice?
Right. So they usually call this an unbiblical view. So it really gets down to kind of your biblical scholarship.
Tell me more.
It's a really, so there's a lot of conservatives who are biblical literalists.
Fundamentalists?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like, they take the Bible literally. So when it says, like, do not murder, they say that's what it says. Now, they don't actually take the Bible, 100% literally, because you can't. There's so much metaphor imbued in the Bible. There's so much poetry.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a text to be taken literally. Historically, there's a lot of error,
Yeah, and if you sin, gouge out your eyes.
Yes, right, but that's not
Please
something
do
they
that.
recognize.
Yeah.
They do recognize the verse where they say women shouldn't teach or preach, though. So it's kind of, I don't want to hate on conservatives too much. I think a lot of them are very conditioned by their churches and indoctrinated, and I have a lot of compassion for that because, I grew up Catholic, and I was definitely a little zealot when I was younger.
Yeah. I think it's important, though, because you say I don't want to speak hate against conservatives, but I would say that we're doing nothing of the sorts. What we're speaking about right now is justice for human rights. So if somehow you feel
definitely.
like your organization is being hated upon when you talk about justice for human rights, I ask you to evaluate why.
Yes, that's very fair. Yeah, I don't think conservatives are being targeted in any manner. I think they deserve what we speak about.
Yes.
Yeah. I just try to hold a little bit of compassion for the kind of unconscious way many of these people are brought up.
Yes, of course.
Which doesn't excuse their behavior, but yeah.
Right. Of course. Like being raised in an environment that is going to reflect all the same values to you, it's understandable how you could be in that space. And so we hold compassion for that, but we equally won't allow their you know what I mean? So it's like speak with the conviction and the truth that truly the views of what they're trying to enforce is inherently against human rights. And I want that level of, dialogue here because that really is what is happening. And it's not hate in any way to talk about human rights.
Yeah.
So
100%.
I won't, yeah.
And I mean, I guess I can jump into my story a little bit. So I grew up Catholic, and it was just, I kind of had this vision for my life. I wanted to be a virgin for my whole life.
I feel that.
I didn't think I would date anyone. I was very in it, right? But to me, this was actually a very liberating thing when I was younger because I was surrounded by a lot of women that I saw losing themselves in relationships with men. And so for me, I was like, I'm going to be a virgin. I don't want to lose myself. I'm going to do my own thing. I found a lot of freedom within that. But then as I grew older, I saw how much my idea of virginity clashed with what the church's idea of virginity was, which is women are supposed to be virgins and mothers, and that's it. And that's womanhood. And right. So I was finding my own kind of liberative aspect of actually a very harmful and oppressive doctrine. And as I went on, I fell in love with a man, and I was like, you know what? I've started to realize more that this wasn't against God. I'm not gonna be punished. It's gonna be okay. And I started to undo some of these things in my theologies based on my experience.
Are you talking about having sex?
I'm just talking about dating, but then sex for sure. So I waited a year to have sex with my then boyfriend, and once I did, I had so much shame surrounding it, but it didn't feel inherently wrong. I was like, wow, this is actually I was having a huge clash within myself surrounding that. So in spiritual care, we talk about embedded theologies versus intentional theologies. And our embedded theologies are kind of the ones that stay in our body, that we're usually grow up with, that's indoctrinated in our church spaces. And then our intentional theologies are kind of the ones we actually intellectually believe. And sometimes they don't match. And so my embedded theology was very much like God is a punishing God. If I do good, I'll be rewarded. If I do bad, I won't be. But it's not actually what I believed, but it was definitely inherent within me. So pretty much like after the first few times of having sex, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh,
and
no.
like immediately my mind goes, I'm being punished. I should have never done this, right? And it was horrible. I was in a horrible mental space even before my pregnancy. I was dealing with huge bouts of depression and suicidal ideation. My pregnancy itself was pretty horrible. I was puking every single day. I was like so dehydrated. There were days I just crawled to the bathroom to like put my face on cold tile. I was fainting a lot. I didn't feel like I was going to make it through this pregnancy without
How far along were you?
So I had my first abortion at 10 weeks. So, and I knew that I was pregnant probably about at 6 weeks.
Okay. I'm sure you're going to talk about it. I want to know what was going through your head between those 4 weeks, between 6 to 10.
Oh,
yeah.
I was just so distraught. I really had no idea what to do. I was in such a moral dilemma. And to me, I'd always been told, like a baby is the best thing in life. We have the doctrine on the sanctity of life. And it was just like life is supposed to be upheld in all its ways. And I did not feel like what was inside of me was like good or healthy for me. I did not feel like it was not a gift, right? You're told like pregnancy is the best gift that can come. And it just wasn't. I was just tore up, right? And I made the appointment for the abortion. I canceled it. I made it again. I was just like really going through it. And I wanted to do what was right for me, but I definitely like was in a relationship that I didn't feel was supportive at the time. I was definitely codependent. I went to my pastor at the time. So I was going to a non-denominational church in college. And I went to my pastor's wife, actually. And like I told her, and she's one of the only people I told, and I was just like really looking for solace and advice and compassion, and she was definitely compassionate. But after meeting with her, she called me back and she was like, hey, I didn't know how to tell you this, but like my husband had a dream last night, and God, like he believes God is telling us to adopt your child. And it was just like, oh God.
Whoa.
It takes away all of my agency. Like,
yes. Because now you should follow God's will, which has been spoken to a pastor who has supposedly a closer connection to God.
Exactly. So now it was like, no matter what I do, like if I don't choose adoption, like I'm going against God's very will.
Yes.
Which, like, what a thing to do to a person.
Yeah. Wow. And
I have to trust that this male pastor's interpretation of his dream is actually God. And I was also like deeply addicted to like tobacco and weed at the time, and I smoked like 20 mokes a day. It was just, I was in a horrible place in my life. And so I just sat with all of this, and it was just awful. And I was like, you know what? I cannot do this. I don't think I'm going to live. I psychologically will not live. And I went through with the abortion, but I held so much religious shame surrounding it. On the Catholicism side, I stopped taking communion for like a year because you're not supposed to. You're technically like automatically excommunicated if you have an abortion in the Catholic Church, which is a very horrible doctrine in itself. And so I was like punishing myself because of this, like trying to gain the favor of a God that I didn't really believe in. And I went to confession about a year later,
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't go to confession. I went to talk to a priest that I trusted about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about an hour long, and he was very paternalistic. He talked almost the entire time. I didn't tell him anything about my experience, but he knew exactly what I needed, and that was confession.
Lovely.
Right there on the spot. Right? So it really, my healing wasn't in my own hands, and my experience was never heard, it was never understood, and it was never honored. I think the best thing that someone told me, I told another friend, and she said, you know what, God understands you. And that was the only thing that felt like truth in that time. And I'm someone who feels the divine a lot when I'm writing and reading. And so after my abortion, my senior year of undergrad, I dived into a thesis. I called it A Feminist Interreligious Intervention, Transforming the Abortion Debate into a Dialogue on Life. And I read everything there is to read in Catholicism about abortion, which was damaging in itself. But also, like, I just realized how much my experience did not align with these celibate men's ideas of abortion and women's experiences. So, you know, deconstruction is kind of a trendy word, but that's a little bit about what I was going through at the time. And it was really traumatic. I was, you know, a lot of people refer to trauma. Who was it? I think Serene Jones refers to trauma as a rupturing of the self. And like, it's really what was going on. It was just like realizing who I was and finding self-compassion from a person who just really hated themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a lot to talk about.
Yes. Sorry, I've just been going on.
No. I mean, I think it's beautiful to provide space for people to tell their narratives in whole. And then, you know, like you have your story and I want to hold that. And now I'm like, I want to talk about all the pieces in it too. So I don't even know where to start other than saying thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Honestly, this is really, I think everyone who tells their abortion narrative, it's an act of resistance. And so I do appreciate the space so much.
Exactly. Which is probably also the best time to tell you that I've also had an abortion. And so I want to share this space with you. And I don't want it to be this interview of like all of your, you know, experience putting you on the hot seat. Like I want to open it up to be a dialogue between both of us as two women that have had abortions and equally have different experiences with it. And you're a spiritual person, I'm not. And like, what a beautiful dialogue. We're both feminist we could have about this, you know? So just like, I think it's important to tell you that, just to change the space, not to take away from your claiming of the space, but I would love to share it with you.
No, please. That's so exciting. I'm like, every time I meet a post-abortive person, I'm like, my love just like grows a little bigger.
Yeah.
And please.
It'd be so easy for me to sit behind like the host role and just like ask you a ton of questions and block out all of my own emotions from this experience, because I have them as well. And I think a lot of mine is tied to the reality that like I'm very public with this with everyone in my life except for my family because they are religious. I hope to in the spirit of this podcast and what I've created in these episodes, I hope to be as vulnerable because I ask everyone else to do it. And so like I'm already over here like, okay, if I cry, that's gonna be fine. Like I think there's like this pressure as the host that I have to be put together, and I like really don't want to do that today, and I want to share it with you.
Please.
So
and that's so
I know.
fake. You know, like you deserve that too.
Thank you. But like it's a role as a podcast hoster that I feel like I'm supposed to guide. So I'm like, oh, be put together, lead the combo. So like if there was ever a time, I wanted to drop that today. So yeah.
Please, let's go on this. We call it a co-creative process in spiritual care.
Yeah. Every time I meet with someone here, like I don't want it to just be what I think. Like there's a shared collaborative process to this that like makes it beautiful, I think, more so than like an interview you see on YouTube or something.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm like getting so excited right now.
I know, let me do that. So I was like, this whole time I was all excited about this. I was like calling my friends. I was like, we're doing it. I'm going to tell her we're going to record this. Like we're going.
Hell yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. So it's exciting. I think it's a very powerful thing because I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. And I guess technically myself included. right? Like, I haven't told my mom. I haven't told my family.
Yeah, I definitely haven't told members of my family, too, as well. And, you know, part of it, fear may be a part of it, but I think a part of it, too, is that the narrative in the U.S. right now is so toxic, and there's so much stigma, and there's so much hate towards post-abortive people that, you know, half of it is just safety and, you know, needing your boundaries.
For sure. I guess it's just so hard to hold a value that you know to be truth personally for yourself, and then to know that if I were to speak my truth to someone else, they would not see it. And so, like, I hold and I don't tell them because I know they won't understand, not because I have shame for what I did. But if you haven't told your family, it's like, yeah, that safety piece and the blindness that they won't understand, and like, it's weird to hold their shame for them. And I think that at least someone who's also gay, like, that was one of the things that I was like, why am I afraid to tell my mom I'm gay? Like, I have no shame in this at all. To which, okay, so then I started telling her and my family and everybody, right? And so it's like, I don't know, I guess I just wonder, like, it is safety, but also we're holding shame for them. And I don't like that.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. And I think that's really valid. I guess I've never thought of it that way.
Well, because we know it's truth, right?
Yes, 100%.
Like, exactly. Like, I know that me getting an abortion was what I needed. And if you ask me if I regret it at all, I would say not in the slightest. Like, not in the slightest at all do I regret getting an abortion. But I haven't told my mom. So how could we hold both of those? Like, yes, safety, but also in doing so, we hold their shame internally to know that I can't speak about myself and my life freely.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, too, it's like, I don't regret mine at all. There was so much religious shame in them, but not once did I regret what I did. And I think I fear talking about it with other people because I know that I believe abortions are revelatory, and our experiences of them and our meaning making are like quite literally, like, we have so much truth and knowledge to offer the world through our experience. And like, I know that that's not going to be honored by some people.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I just don't have the energy to do it.
I feel that.
Yeah.
I know. I feel that too. That's why I don't even know how I'm going to share this. Like, I've been thinking about that too. Like, are you going to share this with your mom? Or whoever, you know, in your family doesn't know, like, what do you do? And it's like, do I have the energy to speak my truth? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think at this point in my life, I'm fine with, like, so I told my mom, like, 2 years after it happened. It took a while. But, like, my dad still doesn't know. I don't talk about it openly with, like, some of my siblings and, like, brothers, you know. Yeah. I think they know, though, because they've seen my social media.
For sure. Yeah, well, yes. Yeah. You put it everywhere. Yeah. Which is really cool. It's actually funny, but not funny for me because... So my best friend's name is Stephanie and my sister's name is Stephanie. So when we were scheduling about you and putting, like, you on the podcast, I was texting Stephanie. Turns out I was texting my sister and I started talking about how I've had an abortion. She was like, I didn't know this. And I was like, Stephanie, I talked to you when I got it. And she's like, I didn't know this. It was my sister the whole time. So I actually outed myself in the most, like, unpredictable way. And I was like, oh, well, I guess now my sister knows. So there's that. And, like, yeah, I feel this of, like, not telling your siblings because of this same feeling of, like, you don't know if they'll see the same truth.
Yeah. And I think it definitely took me time to be really firm in my truth. That now I think I'd have less problem because I'm not going to accept that, you know, like, I just don't accept.
For sure.
Other people having more knowledge about my own experiences.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yes. That takes a strength to trust yourself to be able to navigate the world alone if those people turn away from you because of what you say.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes so much self-compassion and self-worth, and, you know, chosen family is a wonderful thing in the world.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I would love to hear more of your story. Like, what do you feel like? I don't know, like, you seem so nervous, so I don't want to push you, but if
push me, please.
Okay.
It's okay. So here's the thing. all my life, I'm outspoken about all the things that I believe in, except for my family's so religious, and there's certainly a level of blindness that despite what logical, sound, valid arguments even I present in this space, I know that it will not be heard.
Mm.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and I think the most people who'd be listening to this podcast are liberals that are my, that have similar views to what I have. So those people probably aren't even listening. So I think my nervousness comes from the reality that, like, despite the best argument I could put in this situation, I know that my family still won't accept it.
Mm. Do you think they'll accept you?
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very scary place to be.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, well, yeah. I mean, okay, so I have to let go of the host role and be the person talking. Yeah. My mom for so long has always been like, I if you were to get an abortion, I'd be so angry. That is my grandchild. You will never do that. Blah, 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 blah. And that was said to me in multiple conversations when I was like 16, 17, before I got pregnant and had the abortion. So I know those views are there, like but granted, she used to say the same thing about gay people as well, that gay people are disgusting and blah, 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 blah. And now she's learning to accept those parts of me. So like, I do have some hope that she will learn. I just know that just as equally as me coming out and that being a painful experience of having to enact boundaries and tell my mother that I won't accept her talking shit about my value system, I'll have to enact those boundaries again. And I'm tired of doing that.
Yeah, it's emotionally exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask when you had your abortion?
Yeah, I had it in 2017. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, awesome.
I don't know if I could put that in the podcast because I think that might out who I had it with, which, like, I don't want it. Like, do they have a right to secrecy? Like, whoever the partner is? No? Okay. Well, then, no, I had my abortion right after I graduated from...
I mean, it's up to you. It's up to you.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's my body, my story. So, like, and I think part of the reality is that I had my abortion right when I graduated from college. So, like, and that's an important piece to understanding where I was at in my life. So, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to out that information for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's a crazy time. I had just graduated. At the time, I had maybe been like half a year away out of Christianity at the time, like slowly stripping from those belief systems. And then I moved to a new city and I was by myself and I found out I was pregnant. And so I called my best friend, Steph, our mutual connection. And I was just like, the test says positive. I don't know what to do. And I just sobbed uncontrollably.
Oh, me too.
Oh, yeah.
That moment.
It's heavy.
It's so heavy. I can't believe you were like by yourself too in a nude place.
Yeah, it was actually...
That's so isolating.
Yeah, it was. It actually was like, wow, the most isolating thing in the world because I was in a completely different state. Like, I had not made any friends yet because I just moved. Like, whoa, like, that's why I called Steph. Like, that's all I had. And she was, in California at the time? Like, and I was in Indiana, miles away from anyone who could give me a hug and, like, say, like, I see you, I hear you, and this is heavy. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, I mean, it was horrible. Like, there's no way around how isolated I felt because I didn't know who to turn to. What are the next steps? Like, oh my God, like, I had no idea. And I think I called the person I was with at the time to tell them. And luckily they were very supportive. And I have so much thankfulness for like the space that partner at the time provided me to be able to make my own decision and support me either way. Did a great job. And that was really all I had to get through that time. And so they helped a lot. But I think I just made an appointment at a clinic like immediately next day. Yeah. Just started taking action. I was like, I need to figure out more. I need to know where I'm at. I need to know what I'm doing. Like, I need to know so much more because, like, you get that test and that you don't know how far you've been. Like,
that's just terrifying.
Yeah, you're just like, oh man.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh no. And it's just like, it opens up this Pandora's box of questions of like,
yeah, and you start questioning yourself too. It's not like,
yeah, exactly.
But I think that's something that I think a lot of post-abortive people can like relate to, is that experience of isolation.
Oh my
and
God,
kind of like,
yeah.
who can I talk to about this?
Yes.
And how do I go through this? And if I do go through this, does it have to be alone?
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I always preach, like, the art of accompaniment. I think the number one thing people want in this world is accompaniment. And if we can do that by, like, really being with people where they are and helping them through that, and not in, like, a I'm going to heal you type of way, but, like, I'm going to be here.
Right.
For what you're going through. Like,
exactly.
I think that, like, that is what post-abortive people need. That's what people seeking abortions need. Like, we need that art of accompaniment. And the culture has cut that off from us. You know, we have to call our friends cities away, being like, you're the only person I can talk to about this.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Exactly. Luckily, the people that I went to was not a conservative clinic. Like, I was very, like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's the biggest thing, is avoiding a clinic that's going to provide you just one solution when you're confronted with this, because that makes it even harder, because there's this level of manipulation that occurs at those clinics.
Yes, we do not recommend crisis pregnancy centers.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
They're not going to give you a holistic view of what your options are with actual sound medical advice.
Yeah, you do not want to be manipulated while you're navigating a very hard situation that you're trying to figure out.
It's incredibly difficult. You don't know what you're going to do. Trauma is occurring in your space. Like, I was extremely dissociative. I couldn't stay present in the moment. And like, yeah, and then now you have someone coming in telling you, you need to keep it. You need to keep it. It's just like, wow, like, it's already so hard enough just to listen to yourself and what you want to do in that moment with all of this change and trauma and everything coming up, that like, no, we don't need people telling you what you need to do with your body.
Yes, exactly. Everyone thinks they have the answer for your situation.
Yeah.
And they don't. You are the only person who has that answer.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest things, too, that was transformative about my experience was I didn't know that there was an abortion pill.
Okay.
Well, I didn't know until I got pregnant, I guess is what I'm saying. By the time I had the abortion pill. But, like, prior to that experience, like, existing in the world, I just didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I think people still don't know that that's a thing.
I bet so, yeah. Like, they kind of get that propaganda of...
Yes.
How, you know.
Yes, that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I think because
Yeah, please.
The medical abortion pill is not talked about within the conservative movement.
Interesting. Okay. So that's probably where a lot of their confusion comes, when they don't realize that people who miscarry are going to also be criminalized when abortion is legal, or if abortion becomes legal.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
A lot of abortions occur. A lot of miscarriages occur up to 10 weeks, and that's pretty common.
Yeah. I think it's like one in, I'm not going to say actually, because I don't know it off the top of my head perfectly.
But many.
Yeah, it's common.
Well, we're going to have a little bit of medical dialogue, or at least I'd like to have, for anyone who maybe has never heard of the abortion pill.
Please, yeah. I had that. I used the abortion pill in my first abortion.
Oh, great. So now we can talk about this experience. Also, I'm not a professional doctor either. This is just my personal knowledge, and I will have resources for people who want to learn more about what it is. But from my understanding is you take this pill, which essentially causes you to shed your uterine lining.
Yes. There's two pills.
Yeah,
though.
the first... I don't remember the names off the top of my head. You take the first one, and then the second one, I think, is the one that causes the shed, right?
Mm-hmm. I think one causes, like, dilation or something.
That makes sense.
I'm not going to speak to it. I'm not a medical doctor, but I took them, and it was wonderful.
Well, so yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is, like, we've taken them, so I think we have the right to talk about our personal experience with them, not claim that we are medical doctors.
Yes.
But yeah, so at least with my personal experience, I took one pill at the clinic. And then I think it was like 12 hours later at home I took the pill, or maybe 24, something like that. And then you just bleed for a couple of days. Most of it was one day. There was some cramps, and they gave you medication. But it was actually, at least from my personal experience, very easy.
Yeah, I would say it was easier than I thought it would be. Mine was definitely painful, but they did give me pain medication, which helped a little. But it wasn't like the most pain ever, right? It was like probably like the worst period cramps.
Yes, exactly.
And that was it. And I slept a lot, like all day. So it wasn't a huge issue.
Which is never talked about. And like, I'm so excited to be having this conversation right now that like, yeah, that it hurt, but at the same level of hurt maybe that you experience every month.
Yeah.
Like, let's just normalize the reality that the abortion pill has made this much easier. And talk about that. Like, that's huge. Like, maybe that would take away half of the terror when you see that positive. You know? Like, just know, oh, there's a pill I can take up to 11 weeks and still have this at home. And it's going to be painful, but it's going to be okay. And I'll be in the safety of my own home with whoever I want there to be there for me. It doesn't have to be what the radical other sides try to say of like suction, all of these scary terms that they try to say, ripping a head out, you know. Like, I can't stand the narrative.
Yeah, and I think both options are really, it's really up to you. And I think one of the pros of the pill is that, yeah, you get to be in your own place. Like, you get to have your own blankets. You get to, you know, watch your TV or do, you know, find your own comforts in what you need and like have the people around you who you want. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that some people, I think, would really value.
Yes.
Yeah. I like played I played N64 like all day when I wasn't sleeping, and it was so great. And I just stayed in bed. It was a great day.
Yeah. How many times have people heard that? Yeah, it was a great day when I got my abortion. I mean, but that's a narrative. That's a powerful narrative that I think needs to be out there.
Can I ask how many weeks you were when you had your abortion?
Yes. So I believe we would say 5 weeks, 6 weeks. So also, important thing I wanted to talk about on today's episode is gestational age and what that means, because I frequently get confused. And so I know other people must be confused. And so gestational age, what we refer to describe where you're at, right? To answer even this question of, 5 to 6 weeks, or like when we think about things like the Texas bill that just came out that says that banned abortion at 6 weeks. So let's talk about 6 weeks of what? So that 6 weeks is the gestational age, which starts at the last day of your last full period. Scientifically, that's how we describe it, to which you are technically not pregnant at that time. But because we don't necessarily have the date of the conception, we use this framework to conceptualize how far a person is. So at weeks 4 to 5, that's when the embryo will actually implant into the uterus. So that's when you start making the hormones to even test positive, right? Weeks 4, 5. So now we're talking about the size of a lentil at week 5, 6. Size of a lentil.
And this is about probably the time you're realizing you might have a missed period.
Yep.
This is like the first moment you're like, okay, maybe I should figure this out.
And that would be the person who literally has tracked their period so closely to know that you're a few days off, because this would be week 5. You're a few days off, and then you have to say, I'm going to get a pregnancy test, find out you're pregnant, and then you better schedule that abortion before the 6-week point, because now that's where they cut it off. All in 1 week, you'd have to do that.
Yeah, it's completely horrible and not real and not accessible. And, you know, people who have irregular periods, people who do not have abortion clinics in their, like, near them in their city, people who cannot afford to take a day off work in order to get an abortion, people who do not have access to that health care. There is so many barriers, economic, racial, like, that is a bill that will not benefit anyone. And it will cause so much harm.
It will cause so much harm. And it's insane to me because abortion rates have been going down. Like 2017, we had some of the lowest abortion rates in our country. And I would say that's probably because there's better access to birth control. Let's spend all of this energy that we're spending to block abortion in creating better systems to prevent pregnancy. I don't think most people who have an abortion do it because that was their form of birth control. Like, no one wants to have to go through that experience intentionally.
Yeah, especially not as, like, a frequent
No!
form of birth control.
No!
I think it's just propaganda, yeah.
Have you seen the documentary, Defending Roe?
I have.
Oh my god, you should watch it.
Okay.
Like, highly recommend you watch this. It talks about how abortion has been radicalized by the Republican Party to draw in voters from the conservative arena of life. By radicalizing that as the biblical correlation, it connects all those people to want to go Republican because they believe that's the party that will uphold that value. But when you look at that historically of how that started, there were some big players with money and power that influenced the political leaders at the time. So you watch people who are conservative Republicans saying, oh, I'm against abortion. But like years prior to getting funding, they were like, no, I'm pro-choice. And they have literal footage of them flipping.
Yes. So in 1960s, are you talking about like Jerry Falwell?
Yes.
Yeah, and a huge part of it was actually to advocate for segregation.
Doesn't shock me.
Yeah, and so they thought, you know, what's something that we can get a lot of people on board so we can get funding so we can keep up our advocacy against segregation. And they chose abortion. And before 1960s, the evangelicals had a stance that they were not against abortion because they did not believe that conception occurred like at the very beginning.
The first people to give legal abortions in the United States were Catholic priests.
Really?
Yeah.
I actually did not know that.
Oh, yeah.
I have to look that up.
Yeah, it was in the documentary, and that made my jaw drop and take a very close microscope to like, what? How did we get here? That's typically what I say to people who are conservative. I'm like, have you looked at the history and like read about exactly what we're talking about, Jerry Falwell, all these bigger parties, and like that narrative is not talked about for good reason, because if you do, you'd see the absurdity of it.
Yeah. And I just learned in an interview I was watching with Jane Elliott, she talks about Ben Wattenberg, who is an advisor to multiple presidents. He's like a demographer, I think is what you call it. And he wrote a book in 1987 called The Birth Dearth, which is about how kind of his fears about the declining white population. And pretty much he thinks it's going to reduce military power and allow communists to gain control. Like all of this, a lot of fear-based things and racist things. And then he says there's 3 solutions that we could go about for fixing the birth dearth. The first is provide funding and support for people going through pregnancies and parents and children like they do in European countries. The second would be to increase immigration. But he says that's not going to work because most of the immigrants won't be white Europeans. You know, they're going to be people of color. So that's not going to help our problem. And then his third thing is 60% of people getting abortions are white women. So we should ban abortion because that's going to solve our birth dearth, because then white women will be forced to have pregnancies and the white population will continue. And you're just like, this is all, it's, the implications of banning abortion are so tied to racial injustice.
Yes.
And white supremacy. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. And it's horrifying. And that's why the reproductive justice movement is so important. It was created by Black women and grounded in their experience. And it's really a holistic vision. It's not just about having access to abortion. It's also about creating communities where people can raise children safely and sustainably.
And it's not happening.
Yeah, so that was a horrifying thing to learn. And that was, yeah.
All of this is horrifying to me. All of this is horrifying. And like, I don't want to be dramatic, and I don't know, this isn't dramatic, right? Okay, so Texas doing this bill, what I see long term, right, is more conservative states having a populace of people that stay there because they keep the same views, and the people who need to leave because these views are so stringent there. So then we come into this very separated society of all the conservatives grouping together, creating groupthink and a community that really reflects the same problematic views, and everyone else leaving. And then damn, this is how we get to, like, Margaret Atwood's, like, The Handmaid's Tale. This is how we get to another civil war. Like, you just keep segregating people, and they're becoming stronger by, like, finding these, like, and you see it in cities versus conservative areas of, like, these amalgamations of people of specific views living in the same space and living far apart from other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary.
It's super scary. And I think that's why you sharing your story and people who share their stories is so powerful, because it really is an act of resistance. You're like, look, post-abortive people are silenced.
Yes.
Our stories are not honored. And like, you know, we have to say, no, listen to me.
Right.
and do it compassionately, please.
right. Exactly. Yeah, well, badass to both of us, right? I mean, you have been doing this work already of being out about it, so I think some of, you know, your strength of that will be able to help me find the strength as well, because I think I'm very nervous to do this. Not to talk, I could have had this talk about abortion and not talked about myself, like, and I would have been fine. Like, I would have posted this episode with confidence if everyone had been like, here it is. But I think there's something different about, like, me having to, like, share my own personal story in it.
Yeah, and I think you're honoring yourself too, you know? Really though, you're like, why would I stay silent in this?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. So I was talking about it in therapy. I was like, why would I stay silent? I don't believe these views. Like, I need to speak because it's what I believe in. But then the other half of me is like, I don't know if I have the energy. But then I was like, this is the podcast I created to do these sorts of things, and I'd be dishonoring the values that I hold to not have this space as well. So, but I was nervous all morning. I was texting my friends, like, I'm nervous. I don't know how this is going to go. We're just going to roll with it. So, like, it's weird to be in this space right now.
Yeah, it is weird. Don't worry, I was nervous too, and I talk about my abortion. I think each time I talk about it, I find new snippets of meaning. There's a new co-creative process going on, right? And I'm thankful, so thankful for you for opening up and being vulnerable, and I think it's really been impactful and important for me.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I feel like you have more to say.
Really?
Like, is there something, I don't know, like, is there something that you feel like from your experience has been something that you kind of like want to shout into the void or whatever?
I really like that you're taking over as the host. This is fun. I was just like, now do I ask her about her experience? We have space for both of us, so let's create space for both. Is there anything I want to shout into the void? Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much I could talk about of how painful it was to make the decision, especially coming from my old Christian views, and like that being a moment at which I had to make a decision about some ethical considerations that I had never actually had to internalize as something I had to make. And by that, I mean, like, I thought about abortion all the time because I was in philosophy classes, and I'm always, like, very curious about the ethics behind things. And so I thought about it, but, like, it becomes a whole different thing when it's your life, and the decision that you need to make will affect your life. And I cannot conceptualize what that difference is in words, but it is powerful. And so, yeah, I get furious when males who have never had the lived experience of living in a woman's body try to control women's bodies, because you will never understand the personalization of the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I completely had that experience as well. Like, coming from someone, like, I always thought, if I get pregnant, like, obviously I'm going to have the baby because babies are a gift, right? And then you have your experience, and like you have to wrestle with the idea that your experience does not match what you were taught to believe your entire life. And now, like, I had a second abortion, and it wasn't even a moral decision, right? I realized, like, there's no morality, and like, you're not a bad person if you have an abortion. Good people all the time have abortions, and that needs to be normalized and spoken out. Like, it really has nothing to do with the morality of a person, right? And has so much to do with so many other factors. But I think that's really like, we're put into that place, and immediately we go, like, is this moral? Like, what is the ethical decision that I'm supposed to take? You know?
It is a moral question, though, like, for sure.
I mean, it depends on what you believe.
Well, okay, like, first, I think, like, most of life you make moral decisions anyways that we probably don't acknowledge are moral decisions, and the concepts of, like, oh, should I be mean to this person or not, right? Of, like, when you feel angry. I'd say that's a moral decision, you know? So, like, I would say that, like, not to claim, I guess, because you said it wasn't a moral decision for you, but, like, I think that it is, in the sense that, like, you must have created a ideological structure that didn't see it as a morally problematic thing. Fair. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Because, like, I would love to hear what that structure is, too, for you, of, like, how you conceptualize this. Because, like, ultimately, you do have to make decisions, like, when you're pregnant, of what you decide that is. Like, you have to make a decision if you think that's life, or if you think it's cells, with the propensity towards life, you know? And, like, that's a moral decision that you have to, I would say, is inextricable from the experience of being pregnant and thinking about whether you want to have an abortion.
Totally. I suppose I already had that figured out. So for me, the abortion wasn't a part of that. It wasn't a part of the moral decision was whether, you know, how you conceptualize life.
Yeah, how do you? Tell me.
Well, in my first experience of being pregnant, I really didn't feel attached. Like, it felt like a part of me. And so when I had an abortion, I really felt like I was, like, killing off a part of myself. Like, metaphorically and literally, right? But I did value it. I valued the fetus that I carried.
How far along were you?
I was 10 weeks. Yeah. My second abortion was just like an embryo, and I definitely, like, I don't view it as having personhood, but I'm also not someone who's going to call it just a clump of cells. There was something important to me about my fetus, and it doesn't, you know, and I don't know I don't feel bad about having an abortion, but I also value whatever life that was.
Sure. Yeah, we can hold enough space for both of those things. Certainly.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, like, I want to ask you, like, so you don't believe abortion is bad?
I think everything is contextual, right? Like, people who are being forced to have abortions, that's horrible.
Right. Yeah.
Like, any situation where your agency is taken from you. I also think that not everyone, like, I'm not out here telling people to get abortions, right? It's really about, like, where you're at, what you need, like, your agency within that situation, your creativity. To me, abortion is not wholly good. It is not wholly bad. It is a healthcare process, right?
So how do you describe life then? Like, where do you describe life as beginning?
I have no idea. And it's not important to me, necessarily. Like, life, I value life. I value creatures' lives. I value, you know, Certainly. Like, I'll put a spider in a cup sometimes and take it outside. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes I squash a spider if it's really scary.
Sure.
Like, but I think personhood is the real question when it comes to abortion.
Okay.
Because, you know, there's a lot of life that I've destroyed, speaking in small terms, speaking in terms of plants and small animals, right? Or insects. And yeah.
I guess I say this because I'm thinking about the conservative perspective that calls abortion murder, and who would look at you and say what you did is murder, and look at me and say what I did is murder. And I wonder to you, how have you learned to say, like, how do you feel about that?
I think you're wrong.
Could you explain to me why? Because I feel like part of that requires a question of life.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, why murder is a legal thing. Murder's like, the definition of murder is to like legally murder someone, right? It's like, it's the unlawful killing of another human. So murder is unlawful. Abortion, it is a lawful thing in our Constitution.
That's a good point.
So it can't be considered murder. You can call it killing.
Wouldn't a biblical person say that murder is also a biblical term in sense of like biblical justice of what God considers to be murder? Like regardless of the structures of the United States legal system?
Sure, if they don't want to go by that definition, if they want to go by biblically. But biblically also, they never talk about abortion. They don't talk about the beginning of life, except usually when they talk about the first breath of life. So that's another thing.
Jeremiah 1:5.
Oh, yes.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So Christian people sometimes take these verses and really say that God planned this life. And so you are changing God's will.
Yes. I can tell you that that verse is taken out of context incredibly. Later in that chapter, it talks about how the thing in the womb is an unformed substance. And to be an unformed substance, it doesn't, that kind of, there's a contradiction there. And also, the reason, like, that prophet is writing in the way that they're writing is to be like, Jeremiah was super important, and Jeremiah's going to rise up as a prophet. Or whoever wrote it, a prophet didn't write it, but you know what I mean? So, like, there is a rhetorical value in saying that God formed Jeremiah in the womb. God is intimately connected to Jeremiah because God is raising Jeremiah to prophethood.
If I get an abortion, though, I could be cutting off the next prophet.
Right, that's if you take that literally, though, but which most conservatives
That's what I'm
do.
saying. It's like, this is this is part of it. Like, this is the whole thing. Like, when we talk about, like, we want to change the culture, I think we need to have this dialogue. What do they believe? And how do we conceptualize that into our understanding of truth? Because I think that part of, like, closing the divide is having a difficult conversation like this. Like, yeah, that verse exists. How does a Christian hold space for that and still support abortion?
Yeah, I mean, good biblical scholarship.
Right.
But yeah. I mean, like, I would have to, like, if you gave me a day, I could come back with the exegetical, like, reading of that scripture. But it's not super important to me because I don't need the Bible to tell me about my experience of the divine, right? The divine, I believe, dwells intimately in my experience. And I have revelatory knowledge there.
That's a radical view because a lot of fundamentalists would be very upset with you and what you just said.
Yes. I'm considered a heretic in many places.
Yeah, my old self would be like, this woman does not follow the Bible. Wow, Satan dwells within her.
But to use some different language, like the Holy Spirit is ever present, right? And so, like, why would I not be able to, like, unless you thought I was, like, barred from God, which most people do believe that people going through abortions are barred from God in some capacity. But I don't believe that. I don't think that abortions bar you from God, and I think God is intimately within our experiences. I also take a process I don't know if you've heard of process philosophy or process relational philosophy, but it's idea that it's panentheism, and it's just like God is present in our experiences, and we are present within God. Like, everything is a part of God, but God is also bigger than that. And so, like, God knows our experiences because our experiences are God. And it's, it gets complicated from there, but I do not believe that God abandoned me because I had an abortion.
Certainly. No. I think that if I was still within a theoretical perspective similar to yours, I would argue, yeah, like, of course not. God doesn't leave any sinner, right? Like, that's, if anything, you know, you pull one Bible verse and hold so tightly onto that, but forgetting all of the other verses that suggest Jesus spent the most time with sinners. Like, just like, wow.
And I think the next part of the conversation is like, for me personally, I don't mind if people find abortion to be immoral. Because it's not, like, whether you agree with it or not, whatever. You're not going to agree with everything I do about my own life. And that's okay. But, like, how are you treating me is really the most important thing. And are you at least willing to listen compassionately? Are you willing to have compassion for me? I get if you want to lower abortion rates. There are many people who do. There are many people in the pro-choice world who want to lower abortion rates. Criminalizing abortion is not the way to do it.
No.
So, you know, like, I'm fine if people are going to believe abortion is murder, as long as they realize that the way to combat that is to provide housing and to, you know, racial justice, climate justice. You need to create a world where people who want to have children can have children safely and, you know, within economic means, and have good sex education and birth control and all of it, you know?
Right. I have problems with them calling it murder.
That's fair. Because it is a judgment on us.
Screw the judgment on us. It's philosophically unsound arguments. Like, that's my problem. I'm not, call me a murderer, call me a sinner. I don't care what you call me. Your argument isn't valid. And I can't stand that. I would like space to talk about this, please. Like, I'm just like, please, I'm ready. Okay. So, and I think this only comes from the fact that when I was super fundamentalist, I was trying so hard in my philosophy class. I took an ethics class and we talked about abortion. And the person I was dating was super fundamentalist at the time. And we talked through all of it because as he would tell me these views, I was like, wait, but I'm learning these arguments aren't sound. And we would try and talk about it. And it's really created this deep, like, passion in me to talk about these things because conservatives say typically that from this verse, right, that, like, God knew that you were going to be knit in this womb, and so life begins at conception. If life begins at conception, in vitro fertilization, how many eggs have you fertilized as a human, breaking down God's natural process of people getting pregnant on their own time? And when you do in vitro fertilization, you fertilize multiple eggs, you put multiple eggs into the body, hoping that one of them sticks. And if multiple eggs stick, fertilized eggs, you abort some of them. Otherwise, you end up having multiple children. And conservatives see no problem with that. And I'm just like, what? Like, if you
don't see protesters outside of an in vitro fertilization place.
Like, here's my thing. If you want to call it murder, hold your views consistently across every single view. Because if you believe that life is valued and begins at conception, then fucking live that walk. And I will give you respect for living that. But you don't. You don't. And when you say it's okay to get, I know so many conservative families that have done that. And no one really thinks about the ethical, moral things behind that. Also, heartbeat bill, it's not a heart at 6 weeks. It is not. In science, we literally build heart cells in a dish that have a quote-unquote heartbeat and will pulsate. And they're just heart cells in a dish. That's literally all it is, with no propensity towards life. So if we want to define life in its beginnings at even a heartbeat, a little later than conception, all right, well, we need to start standing up for the rights of those cells in that dish. And then if you say, oh, it's because it has the propensity towards life, like those cells at that heart in that uterus has the propensity to become a human. Okay, let's hold some space for that view. if the argument is that something that has the propensity towards life naturally should be given the space to do that, okay, well then don't let go of those in vitro fertilization eggs. And also, sperm, when it meets an egg, naturally is gonna build life. So I dare you to stop masturbating. I dare you to stop wasting your sperm, which naturally has the propensity towards life, on just you masturbating into your hand. You know what I mean? Like, that's a waste. That naturally has a propensity to give life, and that's what God made it for. So what are you doing masturbating and wasting God's precious sperm? And if I saw people living all of these values of not masturbating because of that, trying to get pregnant at every single menstrual cycle so that you don't waste eggs that have the propensity towards life, and not supporting in vitro fertilization and all these things, like, fine, call me a murderer. I get it. Like, yeah, that's murder in your view, but like, people don't hold their views with sound logic.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot take it.
Yeah. Well, it's never been about
I
sound
know.
logic,
I'm just like, I can't take it anymore.
And I think we've talked a little bit about the racial implications, but like, this is like where misogyny comes in.
Yes.
Like, there's a reason they like to harass women and people going into reproductive care facilities, and they don't stand outside in vitro fertilization because it's not within a body that they can control.
Yeah, exactly. But your philosophical ground point of life is the fucking same. Like, I don't curse on this podcast to keep professionalism, but like, holy shit. How can you hold those views at the same time?
I have no idea.
I think half of the thing is that people don't ask themselves this question. Of like, oh, if I hold this view because my parents told me that this is wrong, what does this mean about all the other views I hold? And like, people just don't ask. Because it's harder to sit in the gray. It's harder to sit in the like, well, maybe this is more complicated than what they said. Because then you have to hold amalgamation of different ideas and new spaces that are different than what you thought before. And like, it's so much easier to stay in this narrative of like, no, it's murder. It's murder. Like, I just know.
Yeah. There's a lot of justification too. Like, they'll talk their way around it. They'll tell you something, right? Like, I know abortion care professionals who have given abortions to conservative people who will sit there getting their abortion saying you're a murderer to the doctor. Like, it's just, they're unattached from reality in some cases. Like,
yes, it's terrifying to me. It's scary that logic has just disappeared. Or maybe never existed.
yeah.
It's terrifying to me because how do you speak to someone who doesn't see that? You can't. Like, you can't have a meaningful conversation until they learn to see how that's inherently not a sound argument.
And I think a lot of it is because, like, there's a lot of moral pride built up in those types of spaces.
Yes.
It's like they really believe they know what's best and it's from God. And how can you refute that if it's from God? So they've never tried and they can't question it, or else they're isolated from their community. It's a lot of similar to cult indoctrination in some aspects.
100%.
Yeah. Unless they leave their communities, it's really hard to really get someone to hear you and seek understanding through an empathetic manner.
Which is why I say, what can we do? And that's why I tell myself, like, if I make this podcast and I share it with all my conservative family. Like, what else can I do? Like, I can't change this larger structure other than the people around me.
Yeah.
Because they don't see it. And I get it because I was that person, and you talked about being a zealot too, so I'm sure you understand that of like, I was so blind to any argument that was different than what mainstream Christianity was telling me.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what equally makes it probably both of us resonating now of understanding how scary it is, because we held it with such strict beliefs that, like, we know how strict other people kind of hold it. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. There's no theological humility is what we call it. The idea that maybe your theologies aren't, 100%.
Right.
Which no one's are. You can't 100% understand God if you believe in God. It's not possible. And the fact that there are people out there who believe that they have it down to the T.
Yeah.
Is it really is about power and control.
I agree. They just don't see that.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's not necessarily my goal to get conservatives to see that. My goal is to really help post-abortive people feel loved and recognized for their stories and their uniqueness.
Yeah.
And I care about, like, advocacy for accessing abortions, and making those avenues wider in the small ways I can. And if a conservative hears my story and finds empathy within their heart, and, it pushes them a little more towards understanding post-abortive people and abortion experiences, and, that's wonderful.
Right.
But I'm not going to spend my time trying to change someone else's mind. Because I don't think I have the power to do that necessarily, right? I wish.
I hear you say that, and I'm, like, telling myself that I need to take your wisdom right now and recognize that as well. Because
yeah, but, like, it's also people close to us, so I understand, like, wanting them so deeply to understand us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think at some points we kind of have to let that go. That doesn't mean we, like, give up on them. Like, I have so much hope for people and their transformations. I just realize I'm not going to be the person transforming them.
I haven't come to that space yet, and I don't know if I will.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own thing,
When I think about it a little bit deeper, I have this sincere hope for the transformational change of people's perspectives because of how much I changed my own. And so I hold knowing that there is enough truth there that if someone looked a little bit deeper at some of these things, they could find a completely different life and a completely different ideological structure and joy in it and so much freedom. And so, like, I know that deeply in my soul, but, like, equally, I think it's important to, like, take to heart what you're saying too. Like, this concept that, like, you can put all the tools out there for someone to change their life and it's still their job to build the house.
Yeah.
It's just like, I can't, but I want to.
It's a huge dilemma. It sucks. Like, yeah. I struggle with it as well, but I'm kind of moving towards the realm of, like, I believe in people's transformations, and I believe that I also probably don't have that large of an impact on all of them.
I think you do.
I mean, in the sense, I think it's like a both and thing, or like a contradictory thing. It's like, yes, we have so much power to help people in their journeys and to transform, but also, yeah, they have so much agency.
Oh, sure.
And that, like, like, as you said, like, we could hold someone at gunpoint and make them read all this stuff and understand all this logic, and, like, it's not really gonna do it, like, it has to come from within them.
Exactly. And I think, though, what brings that change, though, is living in close proximity to, or having close proximity to, people who live viewpoints that you don't understand or you don't agree with. Because the more you spend close proximity to that person, you start to ask yourself deeper questions. So, like, I would imagine, I don't know your family, that you have a huge impact on the fact that you post and, like, have your bio saying post-abortive person, even if it's just a second thought about something that then leads into a second thought of something they see somewhere. Like, you could be the beginning of a beautiful domino of change that you don't see the end of.
Totally. And I think that is, like, when we live our truths more fully, I think we're allowing other people to do the same.
Yeah.
And I totally believe in that. I just am not that worried about changing conservatives' minds. But I will continue to live my truth, and I will continue to hope others like make more space for that as well, you know?
I think what I'm saying is, like, you're doing that by living your life. Like, you could never preach, you know, to another person about this topic, and just by being the person that you are, that lives in your lived experience with a lack of shame, that's going to change the world. And I'm dead serious.
No, thank you.
Like,
thank you.
Right?
Yes, I agree too. I think it's so powerful when we get to live as ourselves, and like you sharing your story, and like we both were completely transformed by our experiences. And I think like part of that too is like we are like people are transformed in their experience and in their connection to other people.
Yes.
And I think that is really powerful, you know, like maybe like if one of your family members do hear this, like maybe they'll want to have a conversation with you about it, and maybe they'll, you know, like who knows?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how you do the work. It's not easy. It's like, okay.
No. And no one has all the answers, and we don't need to have all the answers, but
I feel like one thing I want to say too is that before I got an abortion, there was this really big narrative that so many people get abortions and then they regret it later, and it's this very big traumatic thing. And like, you know, conservatives would shout these numbers of like depressive people after they get their abortion. And that never happened to me. I've never felt depression about what decision I've made. I've never felt regret. If anything, I'm very happy I made this decision. And that's just not a narrative that's talked about. Wasn't that bad? Very happy. It just wasn't anything that they said it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so important. Like, people who have that narrative, I don't knock them. I, like, totally. It's okay to regret your abortion. If that's your experience, that's your experience. And you need to live that, right? But that is the only experience that usually gets voiced and honored because it fits an agenda that they can use.
Exactly.
Right? And so, like, you speaking up and being like, I don't regret it at all. It was really awesome and I'm happy. Like, that's a story people need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's so, so important. And I never regretted mine either. I had so much shame surrounding it. Don't get me wrong, but I never regretted it. I definitely was suicidal. I was suicidal before I got pregnant, but afterwards, totally. But I will also say that they like to use that number kind of like they use it against trans folks, actually.
Really?
They say, yeah, well, they say, you know, the suicide rates are so much higher for trans people. And they think it's because of the person being trans and not because of all of the religious shame put onto people and societal shame, right? I believe the same thing with the abortion statistics. It's not the abortion that's making people want to kill themselves. It's how people are treating post-abortive people.
Yeah. Yes.
I was not suicidal because I regretted my abortion or because of my abortion experience. I was suicidal because people were calling me a murderer and it did not fit my experience and I had no idea how to make meaning of it.
Yes, and especially when that meaning of what you're trying to combat of your internal understanding versus the other understanding that they're coming from, that's connected to a God perspective. So this isn't even a fair, like, oh, I'm just talking to another human, but our two different perspectives. It gets into this weird space where it's like, oh, it's my experience versus God of the whole universe. And everyone says this is what God believes. And that's an unfair decision ground. Like, holy that's so complicated.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention all the silencing and isolation on top of that.
Exactly.
And, like, not being able to have community to figure that out.
Oh.
So whenever that statistic is brought up, I like to like point to that within my own experience. It's like, it's not causation, but there is definitely correlation.
Yeah. If people could actually learn that would actually be a very big lesson. That we can't prove causation from any of our research, you know what I mean? Everything that we do is highly likelihood that there's this correlation, but you can never prove causation. So just take a little bit of a questionable perspective when you hear statistics like that, or people who try to make claims like that.
Yeah. I also want to say that I don't even know if that statistic is true.
That's good. That's also a good point.
I think some people have brought up some issues with that statistic. So,
wouldn't surprise me if these statistics come from like a very Christian philosophical university that has put out specific research with specific ideological pinnings behind them.
Yeah, there's some bias there.
Just maybe. So like, yeah, I think all of those things should be taken with a grain of salt. If you've had an abortion and you haven't told other people, that's okay. You can know your own truth as well. You do not have to be a martyr to explain this cause to everybody. It's just as valid. And I'm sorry that people don't see your truth. And I'm sorry that people don't understand. And there is an inherent reality that they will never understand because they didn't walk in your same shoes. But equally at the same time, you're not alone. There's a lot of people who have walked this journey. 1 in 4 women, and that's a proven statistic from 2014, have had an abortion. And you are not alone.
Yeah. You are definitely not alone. If you are religious, God understands you and God is with you. And, it's going to take time to figure out. But again, you're not alone. You are so loved and you are so worthy.
And we love you and we're here with you. Yes. And we know how hard it can be.
We love you so much.
And it's going to take a lot of strength, but we're on your side.
Yeah, my DMs are always open for post-abortive people. You are my automatic friend.
Yeah, we share a lived experience.
Yes. It's time to plug some resources.
Yeah, do you have some?
Yeah, I have
plug
some.
Plug them
all. Okay, shoutyourabortion.com. It's a great resource. You can post anonymously, and it's so healing to just be able to send off your story sometimes into the void if you feel like there's nowhere else where people are seeing you and hearing you and understanding you. It's a great outlet. Thank God for abortion. I'm wearing their shirt right now. Just a beautiful movement. The idea that, you can be religious and you can have abortions, and it's totally valid. There is Faith Aloud, which is a hotline resource for people who are needing some extra therapy. Exhale is a secular one. Faith Aloud is clergy members, but who do not have an agenda and are there to offer you compassionate care.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'll include all of those in the show notes as well. So there'll be links if someone is listening just below. If you hit more, they're there. Hyperlink, click on them. One of the things I ask everyone who comes on the show is, what is one thing that you wish other people understood was more normal?
For everyone who is trying to access abortion or who has had abortions, it is normal to feel the way you are feeling, no matter what that is. It is normal. And there's so much, judgment about whatever you're experiencing, but what you're experiencing is completely normal. And please have compassion for yourself.
Yes. You are full of so many different actions that you will take in this life, and one action will never define who you are, regardless of what that action is, whichever way you take.
Yes. And the meaning you make from your experience is the most powerful thing that you can do for yourself and for the world. Your meaning making is so important.
Yeah. Oh, I want to give him a hug. It's just like you know how hard it is,
Yeah, I'm speaking to my past self as well.
Exactly.
My inner child.
It's just like, oh, I see your pain. I see it. It's so real. Yeah, people are there and people will support you. You just got to find those people, and they're out there, and we're one of them. And I promise you there's more.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been really wonderful.
It has. I think we made something that's very powerful. I genuinely believe.
Yeah. There's just so wonderful to have and share this space with you. That was just like such a beautiful surprise.
Definitely. I know. I was like, do I tell her before? I was like, no, I wait. Yeah. So I'm glad we could make this together and like, yeah, co-create something beautiful. Where can people find you at? Plug your own social media as well.
Oh, yes. I'm at Calling in Christians on TikTok and Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, then subscribe for new episodes released every Wednesday, and follow us on Instagram at Modern Anarchy Podcast, where we open up a dialogue about all of these topics. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. And a special thanks to one of my favorite artists, Yor Smith, for the intro and outro song to this show.